The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome once again to CBBC's China's Digital Consumer Webinar Series 2020. My name is Maxime. I'm the Service Delivery Executive here at CBBC, and today I'm joined by Sonny Tran, the Senior Sales Manager at China Cash. Today we're going to be talking about enabling cross-border connectivity of your applications, websites, and digital content in China. First of all, I'm just going to very quickly make sure everyone can hear us. We don't have the webcam switched on, in case you're wondering, so there's nothing wrong with that. But you should have a panel such as this on your screen and a little hand button on the left-hand side. If everybody could give me a virtual hands up by clicking that button, that will let me know that you can see our screens and hear us clearly before I hand you over to Sonny. I see a hand going up, one or two. Perfect. Thank you very much, guys. And I've also circled here our questions box. Please do ask questions throughout. You can type these into the drop-down box and send them over to myself, and I will just keep these until our Q&A at the end. So please don't be shy and pick Sonny's brain about any kind of burning questions that jump into your mind, even if you feel that it's not particularly relevant to the content of this webinar. Make the most of him as we have him here for an hour today. And as well, just a little bit about CBBC for those of you who don't know. We are the China Britain Business Council. We're the leading organisation supporting UK-China trade. Here in the UK, we have about 40 employees across the country, working across a variety of industry sectors. Here in the consumer team, we support the agriculture, food and drink, and retail sectors. Over in China, we also have 13 offices, so a slightly bigger team over there. That's across all of the first-tier cities, Shanghai, Beijing, Guangzhou, and Shenzhen, and also across some of the second and third-tier cities as well. And our wonderful China team are over there on the ground, helping UK businesses to break into or further develop their China market. This is very outdated, updated webinar list. But the one that you should be looking at here as part of our series will be the next one, which is on the 23rd of June. And that's going to be from ChemLinked. How do international food brands develop and operate an e-commerce store in China? Please do sign on for that. So we're actually coming to the end of our series now. It's been a long one since January. So this is the third last. So the one on the 23rd of June will be the penultimate with ChemLinked, and then we'll have one more after that, which is going to be on video marketing with Creatilogic. My apologies, it's not on this list here. And also just a quick plug as well, we're offering a free consultation with our China market advisors here at CBBC. To find out more about this, you just go to the cbc.org website, events, other events, China Business Clinics. Without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to our speaker today. I think Sonny will have a much better introduction of himself than I do, so I'll let him do most of that. But as I mentioned, we're going to be talking about enabling cross-border connectivity of your applications, websites, and digital content in China. So this is going to be talking about issues with your applications and websites working in China. They might be running slow or they might not be working at all. So there remain internet challenges and tight controls established by the Chinese government and the firewall. Nonetheless, there are still effective ways of connecting your internal and external audiences located within China. So this has never been more relevant or important than now, given that everything is online. So very excited to hear all about this from Sonny. And I'm going to hand you over to our speaker.
Thank you, Maxime. Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Sonny Tran. So I work for a company, as Maxime mentioned, a company called China Cash. So we are an internet services provider headquartered in China. And we've been around for quite some time. So we've been around for about 20 plus years. We recently expanded into the global market about 10 years ago to the US, and then 5 years ago into Europe. And since that time, we've been helping global companies navigate some of the pitfalls of the Chinese internet, which I'll go into more detail in the coming slides. We'll talk about also our architecture from a networking perspective. It won't be too technical, so it'll be more of a high level and explain how we will overcome some of those challenges. Yeah, we've been working with a lot of corporations, large and small, companies like Apple and LinkedIn and Microsoft to help them with their cross-border connectivity into China, as well as companies such as CBBC. So we deliver CBBC's website into mainland China as well. So I'll go into the next page. Just a little bit what I was talking about just a moment ago. This is the key things that you will take away from this webinar. So I'll talk in detail about the pitfalls of the Chinese internet, explain a little bit of more detail about some of the regulations. Some things that I won't necessarily cover will be the cybersecurity law, unless you want to talk about it, and anyone in the audience. This is more geared towards around the technical aspects of cross-border connectivity. And we will touch on regulations or compliance, namely ICP, so Internet Content Provider License, what's required there. But I won't touch anything on the cybersecurity law, which was enacted a couple of years ago now. So a lot of you probably are aware the Chinese internet is a difficult beast to navigate. There's a lot of issues around websites or your applications. You may have noticed that potential customers or your customers, or even remote staff in China, experience problems with connectivity to your websites and applications here in Europe or the rest of the world. The main reason is because of how the internet is built in China, and also how the government regulates the internet traffic, both from a technical aspect and also from a compliance or regulatory aspect. So go to the next slide. So this is the Chinese internet landscape. A couple of key points that I want to cover, very importantly, is network latency, internet peering, and the Great Firewall. So network latency and internet peering is very important when it comes to connectivity, the flow of internet traffic. Basically, network latency is when a user, so that user could be a consumer trying to visit a website, that user might be an employee in a remote office, makes a request to a server. So the server could be the website itself. The server could be an application on an internal network. They make a request, and the latency, or the time it takes for that request to reach the server and come back, is what's called network latency. Obviously, the lower the latency, the better, and it's measured in milliseconds. So when it comes to China, network latency can be quite poor when it's traveling outside, from inside China outside to the rest of the world. That's mainly because of the next point, internet peering. So the flow of internet data is very poor within China and to the rest of the world, because there's not a lot of internet peering. What is internet peering? Internet peering is when at a physical point, so be it a data center, two or more providers, in this case internet providers, connect to one another's network so that internet traffic can flow freely. In China, the major ISPs, so China Unicom, China Telecom, China Mobile, they're all government state-owned, and so they have a regional monopoly on the network. So China Unicom controls the north of China, China Telecom controls the south. So internet peering is not very good. So what does that mean? It means the flow of traffic is not efficient, and also it's very costly. I'm sure everyone's familiar or heard of the term the Great Firewall. So it's a broad term to cover, the technical, the regulatory, the people aspect of monitoring internet traffic in China. So I'm sure you've heard of major websites or apps such as Twitter or Facebook that's blocked in China. It's in line with the government's policies to censor content that they feel is unsuitable for the Chinese market. I won't go into too much detail with the Great Firewall in terms of what it is. I think everyone is very much aware of it, but you know, we can talk further if anyone has any questions. I think a lot of the misconceptions with the Great Firewall is that it just blocks content. It doesn't just do that. So a lot of the times, the reason why your website or a company's website might be slow is that it will slow down the actual internet traffic or the flow of internet traffic for a company's website. So it doesn't just block. So going into detail about network latency. So if you can imagine, you know, the distance internet traffic travels. So distance does matter when it comes to latency. When you talk about internet traffic, you talk about terms of hops. Hops meaning like how many points does it jump to before it reaches its destination. So, for example, if on the next slide, if I could do this comparison when it comes to if you're in a car and you're driving in London, and if you are in Soho and the goal is to get to Bermondsey, where that's the server. Soho is where the user is. So, but to take that route, you need to stop by Fitzrovia, Hackney Wick, Canary Wharf, and then to Bermondsey. So all those places are what's called hops. And if you can imagine the internet, that's how internet traffic will flow. So various hops, various locations before getting to the required destination. Now, if you do a comparison where you don't need to go to as many hops, so instead just going from Soho to Fitzrovia to Bermondsey, there's a difference in the time it takes. That's very similar to internet traffic. What really helps with network latency is peering. So the more peering there is with various providers, so this could be telecom providers, it could be other service providers like cloud providers, it means that there's more routes to get to the destination. There's their most efficient way to get there rather than a longer distance or higher latency. So when I was talking about peering, I was talking about internet exchanges. What is it? So it's basically, like I mentioned before, it's a physical location where two or more networks will connect with one another, and it's called peering. And what that means is that internet data will flow between both networks or more than two networks. What does that mean? That means it's internet traffic or bandwidth is cheaper, and it's much more efficient as well. So this is what happens typically in the rest of the world outside of China. You have all the telecom providers connecting with one another. So, if you have internet traffic flowing from BT, but it's, the next hop or next stop is an Orange network, and then to Telefonica or Vodafone, the internet traffic flows pretty freely and efficiently because there's so many connections. However, in China, like I mentioned before, it's a regional monopoly. So these peering points, there's not that many within China. So what happens is, internet traffic can go greater distances and not be very efficient when it comes to serving content. So this is an example of internet speeds within the EU. So you have two cities and the time it takes for a ping test. So a ping test is when you send an internet packet and it does a round trip and it's measured in milliseconds. So green is good. As you can see, ping results are very low, very quick between cities within Europe. And that's because what I mentioned earlier when it comes to internet peering and low latency, right? Now, if you change that and you do a ping test between a city in Europe and a city in China, you can see the difference in ping. So it's much, much higher. If you compare, it's 20, 30, 40 times in some places greater. So what does that do? That affects the performance of your websites. It affects the performance of your applications. Sometimes you might not be able to get connectivity. Sometimes you might lose connectivity because of the latency so high. So like I mentioned, I won't go into too much detail with the Great Firewall, but I think we're all familiar that they can block or slow down internet traffic for your websites. And here are a couple of well-known social media brands and applications. Some of them are Chinese too there. All the ones outside, all those highlighted are blocked in China. So it's really important when you think about, say, if you have a website that is marketed for the global market, you might have some of these applications or plugins embedded into your website. So because of that, then it could actually slow down users trying to visit your site from within China because they're either banned or blocked. It's always important to use the alternative. So localization, not just in terms of language, but localization in terms of social media applications or applications in general. And I'm going to touch on the laws and regulations. So specifically regarding internet content provider license. So we talked about latency, we talked about peering. The important thing is that for your content to reside or be closer to the users within China. I'll talk about how that we can achieve that later on, but in terms of putting your content within China so that it's more easily accessible, the rule of thumb is that if you do plan to do that, any content residing in China, any of your content, so if you plan to host it or you plan to use an internet services provider to deliver it, means that you need an ICP license. So it's enforced by the MIIT, so the Ministry of Industry and IT is a government body where you will need to register your domain. So your top level domain, like your website, you need to register that with the Chinese government. You need to provide various documents, legal documents, so that they put that together in terms of a registry, and they provide you with a license number. And one of the requirements is that you need a Chinese entity. So there's a few various Chinese entities that you can use. So if you have a remote office is one, wholly foreign-owned enterprise, a WOFE, or a joint venture as well. So you need one of those three before you can get an ICP license. Also, the domain that you want to register needs to be registered with your Chinese entity with a Chinese internet registrar. So, the equivalent of a GoDaddy or whatever in China, you need to register with one of those. The whole process takes about 5 to 20 business days. So if you can get together the documents rather quickly, the process doesn't take too long. I mean, in the past, it used to take months to get an ICP license, so there have been some improvements. And what happens at the end is that you'll get a certificate to say what your ICP license is. You can check it on the MIIT registry. If you look up your domain, you'll see the ICP number, and you need to also put that at the bottom of your website as well. There's a lot more information that you can look up regarding ICP at our website. So we have a few pages on information around ICP. So I suggest you go there to visit, or you can ask me some questions after this as well. So just a quick summary. We talked about the challenges of the Chinese internet. We talked about the high level of latency when it comes to the connectivity and transfer of internet traffic. We talked about poor peering within China. So there's not a lot of connectivity between the major providers. And also we just touched on the laws and regulations. So knowing that you need to get a internet content provider license if you wish to host any of your content or serve any of your content within China. So the next couple of slides, I'll talk about how we bridge that gap, specifically how China Cache does it. I'll touch on our network architecture, how we achieve that, give you some examples of customers that have these challenges. They're all very similar, but they are different in their own way. So I'll touch upon that. The architecture itself caters for various types of content and connectivity. And then I'll just talk a little bit about China Cache, and then we can have a Q&A at the end. This is just a snapshot from China Cache. So our key differentiator is that we were the first content delivery provider in China. So it was 20+ years ago. We set up a network of hundreds of POPs within China, across all the major cities in China. And we served content to users, whether that's private network or public network. One of our first customers was actually the Chinese government. So the peoples.cn website is actually served by us, and it's hosted in our data center in Beijing as well. What's unique about our network infrastructure is that it's a 3-layer or 3-tier infrastructure. So we have our content delivery network, which is what we call our edge network. That's at the lower layer. So that's distributed servers across all over China, thousands of servers, 400 different locations. Our middle layer and upper layer, which is our private backbone line. And that's also where our exchange is. So we've set up our own internet exchange in China, and that extends via a private network line to Hong Kong, and then from Hong Kong to the US, and from Hong Kong to also Europe. So we use that private line to serve internet traffic, enable cross-border connectivity into China. So it bypasses the the issues around public internet and also the Great Firewall. So these are some typical scenarios of customers that have particular challenges that come to us, that work with us. So a lot of the retail brands, especially the popular ones here in Europe and the UK, they might have a presence in China, they might have an entity, they have maybe some stores within China, but their actual website is managed, say, here in Europe, and it's located in Europe as well. And what they're finding is their Chinese users, the consumers online, finding it difficult to buy anything, to take advantage of any sales, because it's just taking too long to load. Going back to what I was talking about in terms of network latency, distance traveled, poor peering, Great Firewall, public internet. And there's a key metric. They say that 85% of users will leave a website if it doesn't load in about 5 seconds. So this would obviously affect sales and revenue for a particular customer. This is quite common scenario for us. It could be retail in terms of fashion. It could be travel. Before COVID, what happened with COVID? We had a lot of customers in the travel and tourism that rely heavily on Chinese people booking holidays into Europe. Another scenario is enterprise cloud hosting. So you might have remote offices in China. You might have users that use a particular application, be it database or something specific in terms of a core platform or supply chain. A lot of our customers use Amazon. So Amazon has a presence obviously globally, but they also have a presence in China. In terms of their China infrastructure, customers can't actually sync their data with their Amazon instances outside globally. And so we've been able to help a lot of customers enable that cross-border connectivity. Because we have an internet exchange in China, we have Amazon who's connected to that exchange. We have our private line that extends from China to the rest of the world, in particular Europe. Customers can realize the benefit of that connectivity. Another typical scenario is live streaming event. This is most recently, actually, I did a live streaming event for an audio-visual company. They were doing something for a large pharmaceutical company to deliver a live stream or several streams into China. So we didn't need to actually stream to all the end users in China, but they wanted to stream to or provide the stream to the local platforms to stream to end users. So we were the middle layer in terms of transmitting that data. And again, we use that private line to achieve that. So I'm going to go into our architecture now. So it's sort of an interactive slide just to show you what it looks like. So this would cover pretty much anything in terms of your applications, your websites. It's all similar and very in principle. So you as a customer might have a private cloud or public cloud or data center where you have your content hosted, be it a website or application. You have your users in China at the bottom. And China Cache actually was the first internet services provider to build a carrier neutral internet exchange in China. So all the other exchanges were all done by the major ISPs, and so there was a lot of restrictions around those exchanges. So China Cache built the first carrier neutral internet exchange in China. So a lot of providers, be it smaller telecoms as well as cloud providers, connect to that exchange to enable the free flowing of internet data and connectivity. So we have our private line, which crosses the border from China, as I mentioned before, to Hong Kong and to Europe, and also from Hong Kong to the US. In Europe itself, we connect to the internet exchange in Amsterdam, which is a very big one. So that's done via private line. So that private line, if you think, the less amount of hops internet traffic has to jump around over the public internet, the lower the latency. So this private line enables low latency, secure internet traffic connectivity between Europe and China. So now, like I was talking before, the lower layer of our network, which is the CDN component, or our edge layer. So we have thousands of servers across hundreds of locations. What we'll do is serve the content over the background line and into our edge layer, so users in China can access the data more quickly and more closely as well. So if you see if our customers connect to the exchange, and the CDN is connected to our exchange in China, so that's what it would typically look like at a high level, how internet data would travel across to the users. So this typical scenario would be like, say, a website, user requests a website, it goes to the nearest node or point of presence in China, because we have hundreds of these points of presence, and then it will retrieve that information from the where the customer's data is located outside in Europe, and then pass that over our private backbone line. So this is all bypassing public internet, bypassing the middle layer of the public internet, avoiding the Great Firewall as well. China Cache also has data centers within China, offering cloud hosting, so customers want to host their data within China, or also allow other cloud providers like, say, Amazon to connect to our exchange as well. So you might want to migrate or sync data into China from outside, and you can do that the other way as well. Just have your data flowing through within China. And typically that could happen the reverse as well. You might have data, traffic, content that needs to flow from China to users globally. If you have any questions, just let us know, or if you want to pause the presentation. So these are the services that we provide in line with some of those scenarios that I mentioned before. So we provide acceleration of customer websites. What we'll do is we'll serve content, we'll cache all static content. So what's considered a static content would be images, web pages, anything that doesn't really change, video files, things like that. We'll serve that content. We'll store that content on our edge servers within China. So when users need to access it, we don't need to go back to where the server is located in Europe. It will be served within China itself. So it's fast performance, stable, low latency. For any dynamic content that's required, so say, for example, if you're a consumer and you're adding to a shopping cart and you want to make a purchase, then all that dynamic data will be sent via our private line. and then to the origin within where your servers are located in Europe or the US. So it's still rather quick. It's low latency, and it's a secure connection as well. So that helps avoid the public internet and obviously the Great Firewall. Similarly, website applications, instead of a website, a web application, either on your private network or over the public network, we will treat it the same. Website applications predominantly, if not all, is dynamic content, so it'll be passed through our private line. And video on demand, so we have ingest points to take in a feed in Europe, in Amsterdam. So if you have a live stream, we'll push it through our ingest point within Amsterdam and pass that over our private line, then serve that either to any other provider within China or to the end users over our edge network as well. So working with China Cache, like I mentioned earlier, we've been around for about 20+ years. We have an extensive network within China, so we cover the whole of China, thousands of servers in hundreds of locations to serve your content and enable connectivity. We have global support, English speaking and Chinese speaking support located in the US as well as China in Beijing, and that's 24/7 as well. So what makes us unique is our private line that we have, that we serve content over. That you could go and go to one of, say, the major telecom providers to provide you with a link into China, but the actual process for that is rather costly to set up a end-to-end link from scratch. So we have this link and network already there with other customers using it. So you would leverage that. In terms of deployment, it could take a matter of days rather than months to set up a new private line with, say, a major telecom provider like China Telecom or China Unicom. Something that we really tell our customers is that our solution is very highly customizable. So we have a customer portal that displays analytics and internet traffic data of your service. So for example, if you have a website, you can see how much traffic is being pushed over our network for your users, what type of content, what domains that we've configured for you, but also you can set up really sophisticated caching rules with your service. So, like all this type of file names, cache and store forever, or XYZ files cache and store for only a day or an hour or something like that. So our service is basically we gear it to your needs. It's not just out of the box, which you can still enjoy out of the box, but you can really at a granular level define what you want to serve into China. Just some last points of some things to consider. I think it's important that when working in China, you find local partners that have the capability within China, but also understand your needs and have a presence outside of China. Although you're looking into China, you probably discover that there's a lot of you need a license, or there's a law or regulation for everything. So it's important that those providers have the appropriate licenses or have the appropriate appointment by the Chinese government. So in this case, China Cache is a licensed content delivery provider in China by the Chinese government. It's an appointment that we take seriously, so we do enforce all the government regulations. So going back to the example of the Internet Content Provider License, ICP license, we will not put anything on our network unless there is an ICP license. And two, if a customer for some reason loses that license or it's no longer valid, we'll take that off the network. So we're always continuously monitoring customer websites on our network, because we help the Chinese government enforce all the regulations and policies. Something to think about as well is localization and optimization of your content for your website in particular. I think a lot of customers, what I found anyway, that with a website, they just think that the Great Firewall is just slowing down their site. But a lot of optimizations and improvements can be made on sites, on their websites, where you can remove or disable third-party content. It's also advisable to actually have a separate website for China, just in case something happens where, you know, God forbid, it gets blocked or there's a slow performance because there's things embedded in the site that is affecting, you know, the Great Firewall is you know, affecting. And like I mentioned before, regulation compliance is important. So there's a lot of licenses that you have to get depending on, you know, which industry or sector that you're in when dealing with China. Make sure that you seek legal counsel. To be fair, a lot of the rules and regulations, there's a lot of it is a gray area. Sometimes it seems very vague on purpose, so that they can enforce policies as they wish. But in the instance of an ICP license, it's pretty clear cut. If you want to serve any content, or if any of your data resides in China at any point in time, then you need an ICP license. That's it for me. Sorry, hope I didn't take up too much of your time. I think it was pretty quick. Does anyone have any questions so far? Or
Hi, Sonny.
hi.
Thank you so much. A really great presentation there. And I'm just looking at our questions box. I don't see any questions at the moment, but everybody, please do send them across. Please don't be shy. If you would rather follow up with Sonny afterwards, we will have our usual follow-up emails with all of his contact information and information about China Cash as well, so you can get in touch. And I just want to check, Sonny, as well, if it would be okay to share the slides with everybody.
Yep, that's fine. I'll send you the PDF version after this, Maxine.
Yeah, and you can also just
or they can actually, actually you can. Everyone can just email me. I can send it to them directly.
Yeah, we've got Sonny's email here on the screen, so yeah, if anyone fancies a copy of the slides for themselves, they can drop Sonny an email. And yeah, I guess while we have you here, I'm just going to pick your brain slightly more about this world, which I myself, I'm not too familiar with. I've had, from my own experience, issues with, I must be with the firewall in China and things like that, from really simple things like maybe your website or some program you're running, or maybe it's a questionnaire or a consumer survey, something like that, doesn't work. And it turns out it's something to do with, like, you're using Google Fonts or something really random like that, and it's just completely blocked. So I think it'd be cool just to see, I think that we've got a lot of universities listening today and some brands as well. And with e-commerce being so important right now, everything's online. And you spoke a little bit about optimizing websites for Chinese customers. And we know that they love to do their research, and they will definitely be looking at your UK website or wherever you are, you know, as for research purposes and perhaps even purchasing from there. So what would be your advice? We want to make these websites as interactive as possible, and maybe people want to have videos and images and things, but really to make it as streamlined as possible, what would you recommend? Like having less images, or, you know, not having videos at all and things like that? Or what are the main things people get blocked with?
Sure. So, I mean, the main thing is, like you mentioned, like third-party plugins. Like Google is a big culprit in terms of users experience very slow, like more than slow performance. So your website would almost undoubtedly be slow in China, even if you optimize your website. So when I talk about optimize, a lot of the customers that we work with, we go through a process where we'll actually help go through this website and look at page performance. So look at the various assets in a site and how fast it will load, or what is the response time. Once we identify those things that are slowing it down, it might be third-party links like Google or Twitter or anything like that. We get the customer to disable it for their China-facing website. And that's why it's important to split that part of their sites and have it separate, whether it's a different domain or whatever, just to make sure that if you do need to make any changes, then you can without affecting the main website. In terms of like large images and stuff, it's always good to ensure that your images aren't too large, but using a delivery service like ours should negate that anyway, because we would be storing a lot of the large static data like images, videos in China already for the users to access. So for example, what typically will happen is user in Beijing will try to access retail company ABC that's hosted in UK, and that request will jump around the public internet. Part of it might reach the website, part of it might not. You might get slow performance or a timeout. But what we would end up doing is we would serve a lot of that static content within China, say within Beijing itself. So the user would be accessing all that static content rather quickly. So the main thing is just the third-party content, I'd say, to streamline, optimize your website, and then we would take care of the rest.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And I've got a couple of questions now, which I can send across to you as well. So question number 1 is from Victoria. We just wanted users in China to access e-learning content from our website. Would we need an ISP?
ICP? In short, yes. So because if any of the data, even if it's dynamic data, it will be stored or sent over into mainland China. So in short, yes. I mean, I didn't go into details on this presentation, but we have solutions where we would store data as close to China as possible. So still use our network and you don't need an ICP, but I mean, that's a separate conversation I could have with whoever's interested to know further, because there are some customers that can't get an ICP. For universities and things like that, I would assume that you'd have some sort of presence in China, so that shouldn't be an issue. But to answer your question in short, yes, you would need an ICP.
Wonderful. Yeah, so Victoria, we will get you in contact with Sonny afterwards and he can go into more depth on that front. We have another question from Gareth. Is there a process within the government for unblocking websites, and do you know how that works?
Good question. I've had this asked before. It's usually it's very, very difficult, and it's to answer. I do know that there is a process. What it is, it's not widely known. So the rule of thumb is to not get your website blocked. You might actually mistake your website from being blocked when it's just that it's poor internet performance as well. So that's what you would need to determine. Usually if something's blocked, it's very difficult to get unblocked.
Okay, so the answer there is don't get your website blocked.
yeah, because it's very, and they won't explain as well or give you a clear idea how to sort of do that. It's not impossible, but and I've heard of companies sort of going through that process. But yeah, as with anything with China, it's not widely disclosed and it's sort of subject on a case by case. But yeah, going back to what I was saying, it might not be blocked if you do have that issue. It might just be that it's poor performance and it's not accessible.
Great.
Yeah, so we can help determine if it is actually blocked or not. So it's something I can take offline as well, if you want.
Yeah, absolutely. Gareth says thank you, and
okay.
Again, Gareth, we can get you in contact with Sonny if you have any more questions on that front. I can't see any more questions for now. I think we'll probably wrap up there. Just keep it short and sweet this morning. And thank you so much to everybody who signed on. And I hope that wherever you are in the world, that you're not going too crazy and that you've maybe been able to see some family and friends and get outside a little bit more. Big thank you to Sonny. He's live from London today in Soho.
Thanks, Maxime. Yeah.
Yeah, have a great rest of the day, Sonny, and thank you so much. And as I said, we will have our follow-up email so that you can all reach out to Sonny if you have any more questions. And yeah, catch you next time. This was, as I said, third last webinar in our series, so we've only got a couple more to go. So the end is near. But yeah, catch you next week, everybody. And thanks again.
Thanks, Maxine.
Cheers. Bye bye.
Thanks, everyone. Stay safe. Bye.